Hi, I'm Margaret at Miller Guide, and today I'm here to help you make decisions about what type of pole, what type of hand grip you want for your pole, what type of adjustments that you want for your poles. So this is a long blog, and so we categorized it in chapters so you can go right down to the section or just follow right along with today's blog. So thanks for tuning in, and I'm going to introduce not every single type of pole, but some of the more common poles that we see on the market today. And so let me just share with you one thing for you to consider when choosing a pole is the type of adjustment that's involved when changing the height of your pole. So there are quite a few poles out there that involve a click and lock mechanism when bringing your poles to a shorter or longer height. This is really handy if you are sharing poles with somebody else, or like myself as an instructor, that you're frequently changing the length of the pole to introduce the different poles to your clients. The other type of poles that you often see the adjustment change for is a twist and lock type. And with the twist and lock, you are going to have to literally, loosen it by rotating it one way, adjust the length, and then based on the arrows that are indicated on the pole itself, you lock it back in place. Now, the issue I have with the rotational one is that for a lot of clients, if their grip strength isn't what it once was, then locking it in place hard enough can be problematic in that when you're putting weight through the pole will collapse. So if anybody has weakened grip strength, one option here, but you have these types of poles or you like these poles, one option is to take the head of the pole and to place it down between your feet. Grip it really tight with your feet. Take both your hands, and that allows you to tighten even more. Now, one other step beyond this, and depending on the head of the pole, that becomes easier or harder to do. Some heads have almost like a flare to them, and that allows you to get your feet on either side of the flare to hold the pole in place so that you can really get a good rotation on it. A couple of points here is with changing weather. In the winter, the metal will constrict, and so that will, if you tight really tight, and then, in the springtime, your metal is expanded a little bit, it might be really tough for you to untwist it. So keep that in mind. Another thing for you to consider is that if you're still not getting quite the twist, the strength that you would like, garden gloves or any type of a rubber glove will really help you to either have a better twist on or off on whichever end you need it at. So that's one thing to consider when choosing your poles, is just how you end up adjusting those poles. Another thing is that if you travel with poles can collapse into different lengths. So there are some poles that come just full length. They're the lightest, probably some of the more expensive poles. Wonderful to use, but very impractical to travel with because you have to travel with the entire length of the pole, which is similar to the Lucky that only has this type of Lucky that only has a smaller adjustment. So you're having to travel or try to pack a full-length pole. Some of the other poles that will telescope to a reasonable length, and then you all have in each manufacturer, or many of the manufacturers, they have them where they come into 3 parts, and that will allow the telescoping to occur at a smaller and smaller part, which makes it really practical for traveling. However, having said that, it's important that when you readjust it, that you readjust each part of the length so that if you're, getting an extra 2 inches on one part of the three-fold, that you get an extra 2 inch on the other, or an inch and an inch. Where I've seen some clients bring me their poles and they've adjusted it to 5 inches on one side and 2 inches on the other, and that doesn't make for as stable a pole. So you want to make sure that all of the parts are well tightened and equally telescoped. So those are things to consider when choosing a pole, and that insofar as the length of the pole and the travelability of the pole. The next thing to consider is hand grip. So each poling company has chosen different materials. Some people are really partial, when walking, that they have a cork surface for their hand grip. It's much more breathable, more comfortable. Other people, are quite comfortable with having rubber. So it's really, or hard plastic. It's really a personal choice. The other most important thing, though, is how does your hand sit when you're poling, and where is the pressure through the hand, so that, if you have some arthritis, if you have a weak hand grip, those are all things for you to consider. And so I'll use these poles as an example. When walking with the urban pole, the pressure that's put when you're doing your Nordic walking is through the outside border of the hand. So the hand is in a very neutral position like this. And that works fine, except for clients of mine that have some arthritic issues in the wrists, and that loading can be a little bit uncomfortable. The grips where there is an actual sleeve to put your hand into are certainly much easier, and I've used them with clients that have weakened hand grips, whether it's from arthritis, whether it's from missing digits, neurological issues that affect the grip of the hand. So that becomes really handy to have this type of sleeve. With the sleeve, you're placing your thumb in and you're wrapping the sleeve around. And any of the companies that come with sleeves, the sleeves are identified with right and left on the little sleeve portion itself. The one thing, if you decide to go with sleeves, to consider is how those sleeves come off or on, or do they come on and off? Some of them are fixed in place. With the more cost-effective poles, you'll have them, but you won't be able to ungrip. And for me, that's a big issue. My hands get really cold in the winter. If I use them in the wintertime, then for me, it's really important that I have everything detached. I'm bundled up. I have my mitts on or my gloves on. I have this slipped into place with my mitts or gloves, and it's not till the end that I go out and I clip things in place. And I also find it easier because I get so cold that reminding my readership here that I do live in Ottawa, and it does get really cold, but I do get so cold that sometimes I can't actually grip. So I really do appreciate the ability to push through with these poles. It's a different pushing through mechanism that doesn't, you're able to push through with a flatter hand and not rely so much on having any type of grip available to you. With some companies, you have this where they've cleverly put a little tag so it doesn't slip out. So it's kind of intuitive how to put your hand into it. Whereas in other cases, and this is a Nordics, there's no tag, and so it is easier to slip out. So you have one more thing to kind of do. And when adjusting it, it's important that you check in the store or when you order the poles, as soon as you get them, that it's accommodating to your hand. I am rather petite, and so this one here is very, very big on my hand, despite it being a small. And I try to wrap it around, but it's like it's just I find it too big for the where my hand is to sit in the sling. As well, the adjustability here, something to give some thought to is when you're wanting to, you can make this closer and farther, which is a nice feature that the click-on did not have. You're set at one length here, but the ease of adjustability, is done through this mechanism that allows you to draw the sling through or not. So there's also the style of pole that's very similar to a standard cross-country ski pole, where you have the loop. But I often see the people, my clients and others, not using the loops properly. So when using your loops, you want to imagine that you're a little bunny going into a hole. So you're going in, and then you're going to now be grabbing the little bunny ears that you see here. So you grab the ears, and that's how your hand rests. So it's in a little hammock, and that's where the pushing off happens behind you, is through the slings of the straps. Now, just another point on when selecting poles and grips for yourself or the person that you love, is that some of these hand grips can be confusing for individuals if their cognitive status is starting to decline. And I bring this up, it was one of the first signs I had when my mom started to get Alzheimer's, is I had bought her pole. She was a big walker. And the concept of, looking at something like this and seeing, just the holes and where to put the hand in and where to loop it, it was all very confusing to her. All right, something else I want to bring up in terms of poles and selection of poles is the shock absorption that the pole is designed with or not. And so if you have any issues with wrists, elbows, shoulders, or you're wanting to avoid issues, then something to consider is how the design of the pole takes into consideration the ground impact forces. So for instance, in the urban pole, they have a divot here that shouldn't be touched at all, nor should it for any of the designs. They should not be touched when adjusting the pole length. One of the jobs that these pieces of rubber have is for absorbing some of the shock coming from the ground up towards your hand. Now when it comes to this style, then that comes up through, and because your hand is not directly in contact, then some of the forces from the ground are lost through the sleeve that's here. Whereas in the urban pole, the design here is such that the V that you see here and the rubber tip is where the shock absorption happens. Having said all of that, it's sometimes just by looking at the poles hard to decide, and as soon as you go out, you will either hear a clanging or you'll feel a significant vibration happening when you're walking with the poles. So depending on the surface that you're going to be taking your poles onto, whether it's pavement versus soft surfaces, then that's another consideration for you to make. All right, when deciding about pole length, we want to make sure that the pole can be adjusted so that when you're standing tall, your elbows by your side, bent at 90 degrees, that your hand is set to the grip of the pole, whether it be resting on the outside or whether it be positioned so that your hand's in the sleeve and resting again at 90 degrees. Now that's what I use for any of the types of poles including the activator poles. The only time I change it is that if I notice my clients don't have a big arm swing in their Nordic style technique. Because the Nordic poles have a booty that sits on an angle, you want the pole to land on an angle. So as you notice in the technique, you're landing on an angle, the pole's on an angle. So if you don't have a big arm swing, then you're not going to have good interface between the base of the booty and the ground. So that's when I'll often lower the height of the pole for clients until either they develop a bigger arm swing or they just simply keep it at that height because that's what's comfortable for them, be it from, for any reason that their arm swing is as it is. So all of these things, that you have to kind of think about whether or not these are things that are going to bother you, things that are going to allow you to wear mitts versus not wear mitts or gloves. So hopefully that gives you some insight into the different poles and choosing of poles.